Hey everyone, I'm back with a question about power consumption. I was presented with the question of how much a particular electrical build would consume power-wise, and thought that was a very interesting question because I've never actually measured what all these components consume. If you've used electricity at all, you've noticed that even switches and other things all seem to consume some amount of power, but there's really no guide to that, at least that I've seen yet. So I thought it would be interesting exercise to go through and measure the power consumption of all the different components by not just testing one, but testing a series of all the components to make sure that if they're not quite a rounds number, we can factor out the rounding error and figure out what's going on here. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a power input that's relatively high, and I'm using a branch to cut it down to 50 units of power going out. And you can see here there's 50 coming into this counter. I have all these counters set to display mode, and this is a very nice visual example of how much power each of these consumes. They each consume one. They're showing you their output power. So this guy gets 50, consumes one, and outputs 49. This guy inputs 49, consumes one, outputs 48, and they're showing you what they're outputting. So whenever you're looking at a display, you're actually seeing the amount of power coming in minus one, minus its own power consumption. So of course across this we drop from 50 to 40 because each of these guys consumes 1 unit of power. I'm going to repeat this exercise with all the other components that are available and try to get a good idea of what each possible component consumes so that when you're trying to design a base, if you're trying to fit in with a certain power load or restriction of amount of power that you have available, you could actually count it all up and do the math in advance to make sure you're not exceeding your available power load. Um, so this should get interesting. I'm going to just actually keep recording this video and just go through all these, but this is probably going to take a while. So what you're going to see is most likely something I run through post-production to do a bunch of time acceleration and editing to make this a little more reasonable. All right. I may keep the original version. I may actually post the original version if you want to watch this whole damn thing happen, but it's going to be boring. So for now, I'm going to take all these counters. Don't care about the counters. Let's go to other electrical components. Let's start with all of these guys. Let's start with blocker. So we're going to put 1, 2, 3. If you happen to be watching this, you're going to be hearing my roommate playing on I think on a 5x Rust server. Probably screaming a lot. There we go. One thing to remember here is that these blockers are all going to be on because they stay on until you actually put power in to block them. Output power is 40. That seems awful predictable. In fact, since that's the same number as the counters, that means each of these blockers is also consuming 1 unit of power. Now, one thing that isn't taken into account here, which is actually fairly important, is how much power does it consume to use these things. And that's going to be a little bit trickier of an experiment. Because let's see, I'm going to need at least 10 outputs, so this is going to be fun. I need to know how much power splitters take. that's even going to be more fun. Keep forgetting I have to put these higher on the wall. See, I think I can pull this off with 9. One thing I do need to know first is how much power a splitter takes. I'm going to try and figure that out a different way, because a splitter divides power. One thing you'll notice in my videos is I try to make the wires somewhat clean. That's usually because when I'm recording a video, it's the second attempt of doing something. One thing you'll notice on my first attempts is it's usually not that clean. So that's interesting. The fact that these all say 15 means they actually are getting 16 input, which is a total of 48 units of power. There's 50 coming in, and it says 49's coming out, but these actually add up to 48. So this should be interesting. If I only have 2, that would also be 48. So it says there's 49 coming out, but these also add up to 48. Take that off, and there's 49. So it looks like on splitters, you lose 1 additional unit of power when you're splitting. So if you're just going straight through, you lose 1 unit of power for the splitter. But if you're splitting on 2 or 3 outputs, you actually lose 2 units of power. So that's an interesting thing. So that means what I'm about to test over here is that we're going to lose 2 units of power out of each of these. So I'm actually going to hook these up. And what I'm testing here is how much power it consumes to activate a blocker. Right? Because if you're trying to figure out how much power your system uses, one thing you need to know, so I'll just start this with 50 for right now, but this will be important in a minute. If I'm not only running blockers, but I also need to turn them off with some power. I need to know how much power is it going to take me to turn things off. So just for the sake of argument and keeping these even, I'm actually only going to hook up 9 instead of 10. Somehow we'll live. So there's 9. I hooked up 9. And so here's the trick. In order to figure this out, this has 50 coming in, so it's going to allow 16 through each of these. Each of these is going to lose not 1. It says 15, but it's really losing 2, so that would be 14. And that doesn't tell you how much these are taking, because as long as there's enough power coming in to actually block, which we'll be able to tell from this first one, as long as there's enough power coming in to block, then it's going to be off. So the only way to test this, if we assume this is 2, 2, 2, and 2, that's 8. And if all 9 of these are using 1 unit of power. That's going to be 17. So I'm going to try and change this to 17 and see if they are all still working. They are. If I change this to 16, do we start losing any? Doesn't look like it. So that means these are tolerant to, must be less than 1 unit of power. Wow, let's see how low we can get this before things go wrong here. Of course, the other problem here is I'm trusting that these displays, the red and green lights, are actually accurate. And if you have any amount of experience working with electricity, you'll find that it's not always accurate. So there we go. That's 2 is not enough. Let's see what happens. 10's not enough. 12's not enough. 14 is. 13 is. 12 is not. So 9 consume 13. Oh, interesting. So what I'm guessing there is, even though our counters were showing a loss of 2 through a fully loaded cabinet here, splitter cabinet, the splitter cabinet consumption of 1 actually is evaluated when you're doing this. So these are each eating 1, that's 4, and these are each eating 1, that's 9, that's 13. That's why when we set this to 12, it doesn't work anymore, but we set it to 13 and it does. So that answers the question. Blockers consume 1 unit of power, and the block pass-through port also consumes 1 unit of power. And these splitters, despite the fact that the counters showed them consuming 2 when they were fully loaded, they're effectively only consuming 1 in a configuration like this. So sounds like your mileage may vary depending on how you're using these splitters. If you want to be safe, you better count splitters as 2 when you're fully loading them, but it looks like effectively you can treat them as 1 and still get away with it. Alright, so that answers that question. I'm actually going to leave this ridiculous splitter setup over here because we have other components that will actually require this type of test. So let me get rid of a few things here. And look at that, a wetsuit and an armor. Don't I look fancy? All right, back to the electricity page here. One thing we know about branches is that they're configurable, and by default, their tap takes 2 units of power. So that'll make this particularly interesting, because if blockers consume 1 unit, you'd think, oh, well, maybe branches will consume 1 unit. And I'm just going to take a guess here that branches probably do consume 1 unit if you're just passing power straight through them. But the fact that their branch consumes a minimum of 2 would suggest that these are going to consume a minimum of 3 power in order to work. So the 1 for the straight through and the 1 for the branch, that's a minimum of 2. And if you ever saw me configure the branch for a value of 1 in previous videos, that was erroneous. You can configure it for 1, but if you go back and look at it after you change it, it goes back to 2. So they've clearly set this so that the branch must branch off a minimum of 2 units of power. Alright, so we got 50 starting, and at the end we are at 22, yeah. So that would be 30. If we thought it was 3 for each of these, that would be 30 units of power. We should have dropped from 50 to 20. But we actually have 22, which is interesting. So doesn't quite work out that clean. Looks like we dropped by 1, dropped by 3. Here it drops by 3. Here it drops by 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, and 3. That sure is curious, isn't it? I would have expected the first one in the series here to have also consumed 3. 2 for its branch, and 1 for the box running. Oh, look at that, though. The input is 47. Output says 49. Input says 47. There's your other drop of 2. Haha. Looks like we need one other thing to test this. It is consuming 3, but it's consuming 3 after the output. That almost feels like a bug. Yeah, it's 22 coming out, but it's actually 20 here. So it's consuming 1, but you don't see the consumption of the branch until the end of the next line. So its output, its main output, is an erroneous indicator. This really should say 20, because it is only putting out 20, but it's not showing that. Still, theory is correct. Branches take 3 power. The 2 they are branching off and the 1 that they use for themselves to operate. All right, what's next? Do ourselves some root combiners. This is going to be a little trickier, because I can't use my actual test setup here. Because the bug that prevents us from plugging in root combiners after other devices is going to prevent me from putting this after that counter or after that branch. So in this case, we're actually going to have to trust this counter or what I see on the electrical tool here. And we're going to have to take it directly from my mainline tap here. So this unfortunately gets a little tricky because I have wind power involved here, and the wind power is variable. But we'll see if I can't catch it in a moment just to see what's going on here. Or, you know what? I can solve that problem. Let's take the wind out of the equation. We'll take, thankfully on this server, this 80 units of solar power is stable. So it's going to be 80 coming in, and it's going to be 79 at the end. It's actually 80 minus the 1 power for the display, which means root combiners do not consume power. Very interesting, right? Necessary. Probably part of that whole design bug, because although, you know, that's funny that if they don't consume power, how come they discharge batteries when you plug in batteries in front of them? Right? Riddle me that. So root combiners do not consume any units of power, but they do act as a load on a battery. Wah wah. Okay, now perhaps one of the more tricky tests here is going to be memory cells. Because memory cells have multiple inputs, right? So to test these, we have to do something similar to what we did with the blocker, which is to not only test their throughput. but we actually have to plug things into them to see if they consume power. So here we are taking 50 off the branch again. And I'm going to use the regular output. And for the sake of time and my sanity, I'm not going to test the inverted out. You know what? Actually, I'm taking that back. The inverted output's always on, so that's the easier way to test the throughput power consumption. So that's how we get live power going through all these mammer jammers here. I know that despite Rust being an extraordinarily toxic game, we have players of all ages and types, so I've been trying to be conscientious of not throwing out F-bombs on every single video here. That's interesting. No power consumed in the inverted power mode. So a memory cell that is off, as it were, does not consume power. Very interesting. Very similar in a way then to the root combiners. They, when you see a green and a red light there, they're not consuming any power. So interesting. I have a feeling that to see how this works the other way, we're going to have to hook it up the other way. The theory here being that when I set all of these root combiners to 1 and use their regular output, and thusly if they are on, they will not, or they, I'm assuming you'll see 2 green lights on them, and they will behave like any other device that is on, and they will each consume 1 unit of power. Don't know that for sure, but we're about to find out. This is going to be a pain in the butt to do, but ultimately it should work. What you're seeing me do here is connect to the set input. Actually, I'm going to just leave that, because then we can test our power consumption again. Should be similar to the blockers. And actually, now that I got a couple of these hooked up, we should start to see the cumulative on effect, if there is going to be a cumulative on effect. Output still 49 though, so interestingly enough, the last one says 49, but the others are all 50, is that right? No, they all say 49, but they all have 50 as their input, which is another false output reading. So that actually implies that they are not consuming power, that none of these are actually consuming power. So that is very interesting. I can cheat here and take this one to turn this on. And 50. So whether they're on or they're off, they are not consuming power. That is interesting. That is very interesting. So to actually test this the other way, to test the load that they consume for their set point, it's a little more tricky. Thankfully, since they're memory cells, they're just going to stay in their on or 1 position now that I've hit set. What I'm going to do is set this down Till I guess I can only set it to 2, huh? I was gonna screw this up. This might screw this up. Nope. Perfect. So the trickery I'm doing here is I'm hooking up all these to the reset output, or the reset input. If these were actually getting power, they'd all be turning off. And so to test how much power load they use, I'm hooking all these up the same as I did with the blockers. And in theory, if their reset and set buttons consume 1 unit of power, then none of these are going to reset until I raise this blocker to at least 13. First, I'm going to raise it to 4, the amount of power each of these splitters needs. So there technically should be no power left over after the splitters, and that seems to be true. If they don't require power, they should all reset right now. Nope. 12. Nope. Let's see if 13 is the magic number. There they go. Yep. So looks like their inputs all require 1 unit of power, same as the blocker. So interesting anomaly on the memory cell. Does not consume power itself, but its reset and its set buttons do consume power. They consume 1 unit. So when you're calculating out using memory cells, apparently they don't take any power away from your circuit, but you do need at least 1 unit of power to activate their set or reset. So that's fun. And kind of a pain in the butt, but alright. Hooray. Rest science. Alright, well, now I'm starting to get through the pieces that are actually fun. Let's get into the pieces that are stupid. Let's start with switches. Bit of a sadist for this one, because you can already kind of tell that we're seeing a theme here that probably don't need 10 of these components to prove all these. Because I'm an engineer, I have to be scientific about this crap. So still outputting 50 units of power here. I'm going to come in with 50. Turn it on. Out 49, in 49. 37. I know we're being scientific, but I bet you can guess what the end of this is going to be. Trying to remember that I'm going to time accelerate this at the end so I provide a summary. So if you're crazy enough to watch this whole thing, you can hear me ramble. But there we go. Drop by 10 units. So, similar to other components, I don't know if it has anything to do with the fact that these have lights on them, but switches consume 1 unit of power. Now, if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that the switches do not cause batteries to turn on, even though they have a red light, which, you know, if you were a sane person, you'd think consumes power. You can put a switch or a blocker that's turned off after a battery, and it won't trigger the battery, but everything else will, meaning that everything else is a power load. But an off switch is not a power load, despite the fact that it has a light turned on it. But switches that are on and allowing power through, in fact, their output is 0 if they're off, and if they're on, they do consume 1 unit of power. Alright, on to the next one. Oh boy. Oh jeez. Oh goodness. Now, if you're a betting person, you should be betting that all these other things are probably going to do the same thing, and they're all going to consume 1 unit of power. But I don't know if you are a betting person, so I'm going to prove it to you. Six. Oops. Not sure how these are supposed to be placed, but they're kind of a pain. Alright. Timer is going to be interesting because they need to get turned on. And I'm not going to set them all high and turn them on by hand, so you can see they're all off. Maybe I can pull that off by hand, but we do need to test the input tap power also. So let's see if I can pull all this off. I have to do them in order because timers don't do crap when they're off, and the output is 40. Okay, just in time. So when they're on, they all use 1. Ta-da! Shocking. I'm going to set this back to 2 again, because if my gut is correct, these are all going to turn on when I set that output on the branch to 13 again. 13 being the magic number to overcome the power load of the splitters and to provide enough power to make all 9 of these that I'm hooking up toggle. So if you're a betting person, I'd be putting money on their input consuming 1 unit of power, but the way to find out is set it to 5. Do they trigger? Nope. Which means they don't go off of 0 power. 12. Nada. 13. Interesting. I've seen this problem before. And if you've ever tried to make a circuit with multiple timers in it, you'll run into this problem too. When I applied the power, it started the first timer, but because there wasn't already power to the second timer, it doesn't trigger. So what that tells me is these all do consume 1 unit of power because I had to get to 13 before it triggered the first one. But warning to those of you who use timers, if you put them in order, you must make sure the power is on to the next timer before you try to hit its toggle input. Because if you hit its toggle input at the same time as or before it has power, it's going to ignore your power input. Yet another beautiful anomaly of timers. So, you know, screw us. Alright, so bottom line is timers consume 1 unit, so do their taps. So if you are watching the fast version, not the slow version, the summary is timers consume 1 unit of power when they're on, and their toggle inputs consume 1 unit of power when they are on. And be careful that the timer or power before a timer is on before you try to trigger a timer's toggle, otherwise it won't work. So much fun. Some of these components really bug me. Timers are one that have a special place in my heart for hating because, man, do they suck. Alright. Let's do OR switch. This is going to be the easiest. These others are going to get a lot more complicated because of their logic. Actually, I should be able to do XOR pretty easily also. So I'm going to lay out and OR switches. Burp derp. Oops. There we go. Perfect. All right. Input to here. It really matters which side I hit. 40. OR switches use 1 unit of power. I bet you're all shocked. It wouldn't matter, by the way, which one of these I hook up because the OR switches and the AND switches and the XOR switches all pick the better source of power when their condition is met. So an OR switch, if you had 2 power sources to it, it's going to pick the higher of the 2 inputs. The AND switch, you have to have both power inputs applied, but it's going to output the value of the higher one. And the XOR switch has to have one that's off, and of course it's going to take the one that's on. So, don't really need to do much. Oh geez, server restart. Guess I better hurry up. I may actually have to split this up in post because I don't think I can get through all these in 15 minutes because doors are going to take a while. Let me go ahead and do AND switches. You know, let me take that back. I'm going to do XOR first. Because XORs I should be able to do just with one. Might make this a little easier to get through. You don't like my methods? Make your own damn video. If you're watching the long version of this, you're insane because I'm boring myself here. All right. Oh man, there we go. Too close together, I think. Here makes this kind of a pain in the butt. Should place these a little bit further apart on the wall. Here we go. Still worked though. Looky there. Output power is 50. Output power is 50. XOR switches do not consume power. Who the hell knew? They got lights on them. All the other switches consume 1 unit of power. XOR switch apparently consumes 0 units. Why? Face punch. My goodness, you guys are killing me. I'm going to make a chart of this and submit it to them, I think, as a bug report, because in my personal opinion, none of these friggin' switches should consume power. It's just annoying. Even their little LEDs are completely irrelevant if they actually have light bulbs in them, but at least we could be consistent. So, bottom line is, XOR switches do not consume power. That was dumb. Time for the AND switches. I might stick to just 9 on this. Because I need the other input to trigger them. Actually, never mind, I got another one over there. Keep forgetting I have that extra one available. Let's see. Facepunch is going to have to hire me on to do QA for these components. Alright. So here's the trick, even though I'm going to hook all these up. they are not going to work until I plug in power to the other side of them, which I'm going to do from my other bank of splitters over here. But we already know my other bank of splitters here is only outputting 1 unit of power per each of these from our previous tests. Oh, that means I can only do 9, never mind. I can leave it here, I guess, for the input measure. That's kind of a nice giveaway, right? So I gotta hook up one of these to the other half to get these to turn on. So that's what I'm doing here. This is 50 units of power coming through the A side, but 1 unit of power going into the B side, and 1 unit of power going into the A side of each of these. Because they're an AND switch, I just need the AND power to make them turn on. And AND switches should select the power, the better of the two inputs. So that's why they keep passing through 50. And ultimately, when you get to the end, it's 50. Unless, of course, I take this. What is this? 214. Watch this. Booyah! Takes out a bunch of power. Yeah, the... oops. Yeah, where am I? 50 here. 50. So, just... Why did that show before? Did show before. Input B is 50. So, yeah, there you have it. AND switches, when you turn them on, consume no power. So, interesting, just like an XOR switch, they do not consume a unit of power themselves. Why do they not consume a unit of power? Who the heck knows? Why should we be consistent? It's Rust. Probably should have just left the display on at the end of all these just to make this easier to see visually. Kind of feel bad for not doing that now, but oh well. You can see 50 in, 49 after the counter uses its 1 unit. Alright. Now we get to some other interesting components. Because I think I've gone through all the switches, right? Did I go through all the switches? Yes. Okay. So these I actually tested the other day. Floor pads consume power. So, you know, I guess I can't technically really show you this because I don't have a way to stand on 10 floor pads at once. And I'm not going to go find 10 people. So what I will show you, however, is that its input is 50, its output when I'm not standing on is 0, when I am standing on it is 49. So assuming there isn't a weird random like rounding error thing happening, then these are the same as a lot of our other components. They do consume, oops, they do consume 1 unit of power. I gotta turn my chat on to get my remove tool to get rid of my pressure pad. Just so you know, I leave the chat window off normally because it's freaking annoying. And I should be able to demonstrate the same thing with the laser sensor. So, laser sensor, ooh, you know what? I'll use a display here because that should actually be more helpful. I'm gonna bring in 50 power to its input. Power out 0. Block it. Power out's 49. This would be 48 when it consumes its unit, but laser also uses 1 unit of power. Again, there's no way to show you what happens to these when you chain them, because if I chain them, I have to trigger all 10 of them at once. You know what? Just for grins, let's see if I can't cause a couple of these to get triggered at once. I don't know why, but just feeling stupid. Power out, power in, power out, power in, power out, power in. Yeah, they're each consuming one. Each one is one less. That's kind of fun. Look at that. They don't. The others don't turn on until I trip one. So, where's the out? There it is. This should be 45, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, there you go. So they each consume 1 unit of power. I'm going to assume that they consume 1 unit of power before they're triggered as well. So it's not that they consume a unit of power while you're triggering them. I think they always consume a unit of power, so plan that into your design accordingly. Crap, you can't remove these things either, can you? I'm gonna turn this on. To remove, I don't want to remove the wall. This is going to be fun. Trying to hit just the laser detector and not the wall. We. Alright. I missed whatever that server message was, but I'm pretty sure I don't have a lot of time here. So, pressure pads, laser sensors, they use 1 unit of power. Batteries use whatever their input max is, so 10, up to 10, up to 100 on the small and large, respectively. Solar panels and windmills are output. So the last thing to test here, this is a little tricky. 4 minutes, I'll shut down. So I'm probably going to have to restart this video here after the server reset is done. This demo is going to have to be a little bit different than before because I have to set up doors to put up these door controllers. So yeah, what you're going to see me do here is, oh, darn it, that was dumb. You're going to see me try to set up these doorways before the restart, but if I miss it, then after the restart, we'll try this again. Pretty sure I can't put these door controllers up without doors, can I? Can't just throw 5 of these on the wall, can I? Actually, I haven't tried that. Yeah, if I don't pair it to the door. Oh, wait. Can I? Oh, looky there. I can. Interesting. Okay, well, then... Okay, I guess I can. I'm going to want to test them on the doors anyway, because I think that's important to see whether or not they consume a different amount of power connected to the door versus not. But the way we're going to test this is, again, with some splitters. So I need... some splitters over here. This is going to be similar to our trigger testing that we did before. Guess I'll do 9 because that was our known value before. So if I hook all these up, 1 minute. Oh no. If I set this to 12, they should be off. If I set it to 13, they should be on. Ta-da! They all consume 1 unit of power. I'm assuming they will behave the same with the doors, but since the server is about to restart, I'm going to have to wait until after the server restart to actually put 5 of these on actual doors. And then we can test that theory to see whether their power consumption is different when attached to a door versus not. But yeah, my guess is that it's going to be similar. So I'm going to have to restart this video in a few minutes, and we'll see you then. Alright, picking up where I left off before the server reset. I'm going to attempt put down 9 doors here, just for consistency's sake. This may or may not work out well. But I'm gonna try. Give each of these doors a controller. We are pairing to the door. And what we were testing before I was so rudely interrupted by the server restart is how much power these consume, and by themselves, just sitting on a wall, sure looks like they consume 1 unit of power. But just for grins, we're going to see if actually having them connected to a door may consume more than that. And here we go with another interesting wiring job. Before I do that, set this back to 2. Here we go. Three doors. 4 doors. 5 doors. 6 doors. 7th. 8th door and 9th door. Well, that was fun. What if our 1 unit of power theory holds true? Then if we set this to 5, which is 1 more than the splitters, they show. Look at that, look at that, look at that. They all opened. Look at that. 4 and they close. 5 and they open. Well, see, this is why we test this, kids. They don't consume power. When they were on the wall by themselves, I had to put at least 13 units of power through to light up 9 of these things, which means they didn't come on until they each had 1 unit. But here, when I get to 5 units, which is 1 for each of the splitters plus 1 extra unit, which means that the outputs are on but not actually providing an output of any output power at all. Like, if these were each consuming 1, like the other demonstrations we've seen, they would not have opened at 5. They would take 13 to open. So riddle me that. Door controllers take 1 unit of power just to turn them on sitting by themselves unlinked to a door, but when linked to a door, all you have to do is apply power to them, and they do not consume that unit of power. So that's interesting. That's potentially problematic when you're trying to configure yourself, because you do need 1 unit of power, but that 1 unit of power could be for anything. So when you're trying to trigger your door, whatever your device is that's sending power to the door, it has to send power. It just doesn't have, it's just not going to consume any of that power. So if you had 100 doors, you're not going to suddenly be consuming 100 units of power. You're basically going to be consuming 1. But there's no way to chain these things. So since you can't chain door controllers, there aren't a lot of scenarios in which you can avoid exactly what I'm doing right here, using a splitter or something, or a branch or something to send power off to them. So you do have to output power, but they're not going to create a combined load on your circuit. Interesting. In this case, I just need 5 to power 9 doors. I don't need 13 to power 5 doors. So weird calculation there, but there you have it. Alright, and I had to restart the recording one last time here after I got rid of all those doors and set this up again, because it occurred to me we started with counters, but we were looking at counters in display mode, and counters in display mode used 1 unit of power, but we didn't really test what happened when you're using them for their intended purpose, which is counting. So in order to do that properly, it requires that I set up my splitter over here again and put up 9 that I can trigger with input power, so that not only can we test how much power they consume, but how much they put through. So right now, I'm going to hook up all these power leads to the 9 increment counter inputs. And we'll be able to learn something about this in a moment, the same way we did with the doors, which is, does it only require having power to increment, or does it require 1 unit of power to increment? The way we tell the difference is, when I change this branch that's coming into the splitter array here, right now it's set at its default of 2. When I set it to 4, nothing should be going out. When I set it to 5, power will be coming out, but not enough power to run each of these if they use 1. So again, we'll have to go for the magic number of 13. So 5 means they just need power, like the door controllers did. 13 means they consume a unit of power. So let's see what happens here. We're gonna, oh, and I've set all of these counters, by the way, to a pass-through value of 1. Even though it's set duration, because they stole code, obviously, from the timer. Ignore that. That actually just means, like, threshold. So I'm going to set this to 4. Shouldn't see anything here. I'm going to set this to 5. Still nothing. We may have the same issue as we have with the timer here also, by the way, since it seems to be the same code, in that it might only trigger the first one that actually has power. Nope, doesn't appear that it has the same bug as the timer. So, didn't trigger at 5, did trigger at 13, so that tells us that you need 1 unit of power to run the input. And now that they're all on, let's look at what the end power is. 40. Just like we'd expect from the counter throughput test, they consume 1 unit of power as a display. They pass-through display. They consume 1 unit of power as a counter. They require 1 unit of power to trigger their increment. I'll set this back down to 2, and we'll try this again. Oh, you know what? I want to test this one more way, because as soon as I do the decrement, it's going to go back to 0, and then I won't know if clear is working. So I'm going to turn this off, turn it on again, see if I can get them to count up to 2. Oops, I need to go back to what, 13? Should make them all go to 2. Let's go back to 4. Should turn them off. 13, turn them on. Do they all go to 3? Good, perfect. That's what I like. All right. So I'm going to set this back to 2, so technically they're not going to trigger. And now I need to hook all these up to their decrement counter input. And that's going to tell us whether the decrement input also consumes 1 unit of power. Nothing happening yet, which is expected. There's only 2 expected possibilities here. One is when we set the power to 5, they'll all decrement because decrement doesn't use power. Or when we set it to 13, they'll all decrement because they do use 1 unit of power. So now we're hooked up to all the decrement counters. We're going to go to 5. Oops, 5, not 15, please. 5. They do not decrement. 13, they do. Turn it off by going below that. 13 again, you go to 1. Alright. And then finally, the last thing we test here is going to be the clear counter input, which one would assume would behave the same way as all the increment and decrement inputs. But assumptions are a killer in this game because clearly there is not a whole lot of consistency between the programming of these objects, or they're just buggy as heck. So set it to 5 and see if they clear. They do not. Set to 13, see if they clear. They do, and they're off. So there's your answer. Counter consumes 1. As a display, it consumes 1. Its increment input consumes 1. Its decrement input consumes 1. And its clear input consumes 1. Now, I believe I have tested all of the different inputs and all the different components that consume power to see which ones consume and which ones do not and how much they consume. Again, I will put up a long form of this, probably. Probably not the same time as the short version, but because it'll take longer for it to render and output. But if you're watching the short version here, then you got all the summary, and I think at the end I'm going to throw up a little spreadsheet that just summarizes all these as well. So look forward to that. And that, hopefully, is that until later.